As a trucker, I'm sure you've heard the term basics a time or two before, and I'm sure you also know that it's an acronym which stands for Behavioral Analysis and Safety Improvement Categories. You also probably know that those basics consist of different categories that determine your CSA score, and your CSA score identifies your level of risk as a commercial motor carrier. Well, the FMCSA is proposing some changes for 2025 that are hopefully going to simplify the entire safety measurement system. The biggest changes are renaming basics to compliance groups and updating the safety categories, grouping related violations, simplifying the severity weights of violations with more focus on recent violations, changing safety event groups to proportionate percentiles, and changing the thresholds at which the FMCSA will intervene. So let's look at each one of these individually. Okay, first of all, they're renaming basics, which will now be called compliance groups. Hey, the way I see it, that's just one less acronym to remember. Outside of that, they're making changes to the actual categories, which are used in roadside inspection violations and investigation results to measure your safety performance. Historically, the categories were unsafe driving, crash indicator, hours of service compliance, vehicle maintenance, controlled substance and alcohol, hazardous materials compliance, and driver fitness. So with their changes, the categories are now going to be unsafe driving, crash indicator, hours of service compliance, vehicle maintenance driver observed, hazardous materials compliance, and driver fitness. Looks about the same, right? Well, almost. The biggest change is the addition of vehicle maintenance driver observed and the removal of the controlled substance and alcohol category. The reason for this is that the controlled substance and alcohol category has the fewest violations of any category, and those violations are not cited very often. But don't get too excited. You can't just go out and start drinking and driving. The controlled substances and alcohol category has been rolled up into unsafe driving, where you can still get drug and alcohol violations. As far as the new category, vehicle maintenance is the largest basic in terms of both number of violation identifiers and the number of violations cited during inspections. The main goal here is to have a more specific breakdown of vehicle maintenance issues, which will help carriers know where to improve and enforcement officials to target certain areas. If you have any questions or concerns at this point, you can call, email, or fill out the form in the description to get in touch with one of our DOT compliance specialists. Two other major changes they are making are related to grouping violations and simplifying the severity weights of violations. I'm not going into too much detail here on how everything is being grouped, because the important point to make is that there will be a lot less codes to choose from per category. Just take a look at this table.
Specifically, the 55-inch rectangular white kitchen table with a sintered stone tabletop and metal.
Just take a look at this table on screen, which shows a summary of the number of codes that were consolidated by safety category. Overall, they're reducing the number of codes from 973 to 116. That's a massive drop. And consolidating these codes will reduce confusion around which codes apply to which violations. With the current setup, two inspectors citing the same violations could end up using a totally different code. In addition, the severity weight of each violation will be simplified from a scale of 10 to a scale of 2. Ultimately, this removes the subjective nature of the current setup, where one inspector might rate a violation at 4, while another might rate it at 6. Now they have two choices, 1 or 2. Another important change is that proportionate percentiles are replacing safety event groups. Currently, the FMCSA places motor carriers in safety event groups, and the group they fall into is based on their number of inspections and crashes. For example, carriers in the hours of service category with 3 to 10 driver inspections are compared to each other, while carriers with 11 to 20 driver inspections are compared to each other.
Okay, good. What's the problem?
The problem with this is that when a carrier moves into a different safety event group, there can be a large percentile jump based solely on a no violation inspection in this new safety group. By using proportionate percentiles, they would use the exact number of safety events to assign a percentile for a motor carrier. This eliminates the use of and issue with the cutoffs established by the safety event groups. The last thing we're discussing, and maybe the most concerning, are changes to the intervention thresholds. These intervention thresholds are percentages that the FMCSA uses to determine when they need to intervene with motor carriers. And they were established because they're strong indicators of future crash risk. So once a carrier hits a certain percentage, the FMCSA says, hey, this carrier is not complying with safety regulations, we need to intervene. And that usually starts with mailing a warning letter. The top 3 categories we mentioned earlier, unsafe driving, crash indicator, and hours of service compliance, have the strongest correlation to crash risk, so they have a much lower intervention threshold. These are all set at 65% for property carriers, 60% for hazmat carriers, and 50% for passenger carriers. The somewhat concerning part is that they are increasing the percentages for hazardous materials compliance and driver fitness. I say it's concerning because this basically prolongs their intervention, and some are being bumped up to 90%. With that said, the FMCSA says they have data to back this up and claim that hazmat compliance and driver fitness have the lowest correlation to crash risk, and they believe that by raising the intervention thresholds, they'll be able to focus on the higher risk areas. So, even though we could get into a lot more detail, that basically covers all of the changes. Hopefully you know that you or your safety manager should be on top of these regulation changes. But if you have concerns or any questions about these changes, your CSA scores, or becoming part of one of our DOT compliance programs, just call, email, or fill out the form in the description, and one of our DOT compliance specialists will help you out.